Now in this module, we obviously added a lot of logic to our burger builder again. There is one improvement or fix we should apply to it though. Can be subtle to spot, but it really improves our application. Let's have a look at this with error handler higher order component. There we obviously added our interceptors in component will mount. And of course it makes sense to add them there because we wanted to make sure that we can intercept errors and hence show this error modal we set up in this higher order component. We have one issue though. This with error handler method can be wrapped around multiple components. That's the whole idea of having this higher order component. Otherwise, we could have put that code directly into the burger builder if that were the only component where we want to use that. Right now, it is the only component we're using it, but again, our higher order component is of course not limited to the burger builder. The problem we have is if we add this higher order component with error handler to other components, we'll call component will mount again and again, of course, because the class component we return in this higher order component is created every time this is wrapped around an existing component. So every time we call with error handler on the element we're exporting as we do in the burger builder. So we're actually attaching multiple interceptors in our application and we're attaching them to the same Axios instance. The problem of course is, and we don't have that right now, but we will face it later in the course, the mentioned routing will lead to the problem. Once we have more pages where we might use with error handler, we of course create this instance here multiple times, this component here, and therefore all the old interceptors, so all the interceptors we set up when we wrapped this around another component, which might not be needed anymore, still exist. So we have a lot of dead interceptors sitting in memory, which actually are not dead, but which still react to our requests. And in the worst case, they lead to errors or do somehow change the state of our application. But even in the best case, they leak memory because that's code that still runs that is not required anymore. So we should actually remove the interceptors when this component gets unmounted. So when this specific instance of our with error handler wrapper is not needed anymore. And there actually is a lifecycle hook for this too. It's component will unmount. Now, as the name suggests, this is a lifecycle method which is executed at the point of time a component isn't required anymore. Alternatively, if you're using a functional component here and you're not returning this class-based component, so if you're effectively using the useEffect hook thus far, then you would write this code in the return function of useEffect, since this function runs whenever the cleanup is done for this component. Now, to be able to remove an interceptor here, we need to store a reference to the interceptors we create in properties of this class. Now we have the state property already, we can simply add new properties. So for that, I will simply create a new property on the fly by using this keyword to refer to the class, and then any name of your choice. I'll name this the request interceptor, maybe like this, request interceptor, and we'll store the result of our interceptor setup, which is just a reference to the interceptor passed back by Axios automatically. And I'll do the same for the response interceptor here. So now I have two new properties in my class, and I can now use these properties in will unmount to remove the interceptors. There we can now simply use Axios interceptors, just like we created them, but now we can also access request and response there and call eject. And eject now requires the reference to the interceptor. So here, this request interceptor, and I'll simply duplicate this to also do the same for the response. So for the response object, I also call eject and then call response interceptor. And now with that, we got this set up in component will unmount, and we should remove our interceptors with that, preventing memory leaks. Now to quickly see if that works, I'll save that file and then I'll go into the app.js file, which is where we add the burger builder. And I want to add some code to remove it after some time, just to see if will unmount gets called. So there I will simply console log will unmount, and I want to output this request interceptor and this response interceptor, the two properties we added, to see if they are set at the beginning of will unmount, because I'm using them thereafter. So now with that saved, let's go back to app.js, and to make sure that burger builder disappears after a while, I'll temporarily add a state to my app component. It is a class-based component, so I can of course do this, and I will simply add a show property, which is true initially, and I will then use it here with this state show to show the burger builder, or show null, which essentially removes the burger builder, of course, because it's only added to the DOM if show is true. So now I just need a way to, well, unset show after a while. And for that, and again, this is all just for testing, I'll add component did mount here. And there I will simply use the normal set timeout method provided by JavaScript. And after 5 seconds, I want to execute this function here. And in that function, I'll call set state and set show to false. And again, I will remove this code in a second. It's only there to test if this works, if it does call will unmount. So with all that, let's save this. And now let's reload the application. We see the burger, and let's wait 5 seconds. And we should then see will unmount, and we see 0, 0. And that's actually correct, because these are simply the IDs. There are IDs being kept in memory by Axios for both the request and response interceptors, so 2 different lists of interceptors, and they start with index 0. We added 1 to each list, 1 request and 1 response interceptor, so that is why we see 2 zeros here. So what we can see is it does work. We can now remove that console log statement from unmount. It does successfully get this reference to the interceptor, and we can rely on eject working. And this will just ensure that whenever we don't need the burger builder component anymore, and of course this is not the case right now in the application, but it will soon be, that we clean up the interceptors which we attached due to using with error handler on the burger builder, so that if we reuse with error handler in our application, we don't create more and more interceptors with the old ones living on. So with that, I can remove my code here in the app.js file to have a normally working application again. So remove all the code we added, the state and the component did mount with the set timeout, so that we have the same app component as before, but now again with the improved application where we actually remove interceptors we don't need anymore.